Hello and welcome back to another episode of NT Movie Reviews coming at you online and in print format at nicktiffany.com, on YouTube and all the podcast platforms at NT Movie Reviews, as well as on all social media platforms at NT Movie Reviews. Today I'm joined by writer and director Amy Wang for her feature film debut, Slanted. The film tells the story of a Chinese-American teen, Joan Wang, who just wants to fit in at her high school, but when she hastily undergoes an experimental medical procedure to become Caucasian, the consequences could be devastating in this biting, speculative fiction satire. This was the South by Southwest Grand Jury winner. Amy, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on a feature debut that is gonna make waves.
Thank you.
How exciting is it to be finally sharing this film with wider audiences?
Oh man, it's awesome. I can't wait to get a release and have even more people in America overseas watching it. But it's been a blast so far.
Oh, wonderful. We'll go back a little bit of ways, just to somehow maybe you got started in film. I'd love to know. You grew up in Australia, and I
Yes.
would love to know what that film upbringing was like for you there. What movies did you kind of grow up
Yeah.
on, and was there anything
Oh,
that earlier in your life you kind of grabbed onto of like, I need to be doing something like this?
yes, yes. So I was probably 14, 15 years old when I watched Fight Club. Um, it's a classic answer, but I feel like Fight Club, Seven, David Fincher, really changed my life in my early teens. And one of my first jobs was at Blockbuster Video when it was still
Awesome.
around. You know,
Awesome.
so I, worked with a lot of older guys who would get me to watch like Cronenberg and Aronofsky and just all of those types of films that really resonated with me. I definitely gravitated towards kind of darker stories, and I just wanted people to feel how I felt. And movies like Fight Club, especially, I feel like obviously the story is extremely entertaining, but it was always also about something,
Hmm.
about consumerism. And I wanted to make movies that push the boundaries of what society is. So that's kind of what I aim to do now with my stuff.
I love that. Fight Club, it could be a typical classic answer, but I was like, no, I remember being 14 or 15 and
Yeah.
going on a binge with a couple of my friends, and it was like we'd never seen Seven. They'd never seen
Yeah.
Fight Club. We're
Yeah.
watching Usual Suspects and so many of these films that we're
Yes.
like, what? I'm like, I didn't know movies could be like this. And I
Totally.
knew we were gonna get
Totally.
along because I'm definitely more into the darker
Yeah.
realistic,
Yes.
darker approach. Darker could always be a bad description, I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes. It's
Totally.
grounded. It's grounded. It's realistic.
Totally. I completely agree. Yeah.
And
Like,
some
no,
people,
yeah.
they don't want to be confronted with the reality of certain situations.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, no disrespect to the Star Wars and, the
Sure.
sci-fi stuff, but yeah, I'm definitely more into what our society is going through.
As a Chinese Australian teenager, could you
Hmm.
speak a bit about what that experience was like growing up there? And then
Yeah.
did that experience change or kind of remain the same when you were in America here
Mm.
at school?
Yeah. Great question. So similar in the movie, I was actually born in China, and I immigrated to Australia when I was around 7. When I went to Australia, I didn't know a word of English. I watched hours and hours of The Simpsons to kind of learn English, and obviously, did workbooks and memorized and all of that. I definitely growing up in the 90s, growing up in the early 2000s, I think Australia at the time was still finding its footing as a country, and Sydney in particular. We had a lot of immigrants from Southeast Asia because we're so close, to Thailand and Laos and Singapore. And I think the Asian population really received most of the racism that was prevalent at the
Mhm.
time. When I was going to high school, I often would wake up in the morning and just think, wouldn't life just be easier if I was white? And that was a recurring kind of mentality that I had. And I started working in retail when I was really young. I worked at Target. That was my first job when I was 14 and 7 months, which is the legal age in
I
Australia
was
at
like
the
7 months.
time.
That's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
specific.
yeah. It's very, yeah. So I also just got to sample, I feel like a lot of um, Australians as somebody who worked in retail, and I had so many people ask me, "Where are you really from? How come you speak English without an accent? Well done." Like things like that that kind of were
That's really good
just
for you.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
very impressive
exactly,
for
exactly. All of those things, like they may not have been like violent attacks, but they definitely sunk into my inner voice and how I thought about myself and how I belonged. And then when I came out to America, interestingly, because I came out to LA about 10 years ago for film school, and
like AFI,
so
if I
AFI,
saw correct.
yes. Yeah, I just didn't feel as much of an outsider as I did back in Australia, which was nice. Maybe because also I didn't feel like I needed to belong that much to American society because I had the accent. I grew up and felt I was Australian, so I didn't feel like I needed people to think I was American.
Sure.
So my time in LA was really nice, and then was in 2021 when there was a shooting in Atlanta in a
Mm.
Asian
Hmm.
American spa, and a bunch of Asian American women were murdered. That it kind of jolted me into remembering all of the emotions that I felt when I was growing up in Australia. Because for the first time, I felt unsafe in the States, even though it didn't happen in LA. But the pandemic and all of the anti-Asian, especially anti-Chinese rhetoric that was
Sure.
happening, around
Hmm.
America was very loud. So that's kind of when I started coming up with this idea, taking again those feelings that I had when I was growing up as a teenager and kind of rehashing it and making it seem entertaining.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of
Um,
course.
because I think you're right as far as when we look at what was happening in America at the time, and you look at the hate that Asians were receiving, that Asian
Mm,
people were receiving, even if that's not something you experienced directly there, I always try to rationalize things in my own head on the smallest scale. I think of people going to movie theaters. When I bring friends to movies, sometimes there's still this weird
mhm.
feeling of like, okay, is everybody in here a normal person? Are there no
Yeah,
people checking exits or what? There's this. I've got friends who
totally.
there's still hesitation going to a movie theater. Not that it happened here in Seattle. Not that
Yeah,
it was something that I've directly or that they've directly faced, but there is this lingering fear of this was a place that was safe and now it's
totally.
not. Or
Totally.
on another scale, these innocent Asian women can be murdered at the spa, and now
Yes,
this can happen anywhere. And
absolutely.
and so I love to hear that you took some of that pain and some of that emotion and wanted to tell a story like this that I think needs to be told and
Yeah,
carries so much complexity into race, into this age of social media that we're into.
yeah,
Something that really stood out to me was this whole idea at the beginning of the film, these filters that Jonas
yeah,
uses. Already we're a beauty obsessed culture now. How can I perfect my face and look better? But this idea of how
yes,
can I look whiter and how can I sort of change
yeah,
my appearance here? And that's not something that we had necessarily 10, 20 years ago.
totally,
And so I
totally.
love tapping into this more modern feeling of what all kids and parents, I'm sure, know and see.
Yeah,
And I would just love to know when you were working, well, number one, what was it like getting to work with Shirley Chen, who we saw at SIFF
yes,
last year with Dee Dee, on the
yes,
character of Joan, and how much did she bring to that role, maybe that wasn't on the script, that the two of you could
yeah,
kind of work together on based on your experiences?
totally. Yes, yes. She is, fuck, am I allowed to swear?
You are. You can.
Okay, great. She's fucking brilliant. In fact, all of my actresses were brilliant, and every single one of them added so much to their roles and to the script. Like there are things, Maitri, who plays Brenda, there
Ah,
there are things in the I mean, I don't want to spoil the ending, but in the third act that it's her idea, you know? Yeah, I really love collaborating and best idea wins. That's always the case. And Shirley, she from the get-go, it was really important for me and for Shirley and McKenna to make sure that they both felt like the same person. So
Hmm.
we really workshopped a lot of their mannerisms. Both of them spent a lot of time together, imitated each other, and that was a huge, feat that they both really sunk their teeth into. I mean, Shirley did so much work on the script, on her character arc, and it was really interesting. I mean, mapping out because in many ways, I mean, she kind of disappears right halfway through,
Hmm.
even though the journey of the character goes through the whole film, but she really is only half.
Sure.
I remembered she had a lot of questions as to, what was her low point, because in most movies, the actor's low point is at the end of act two.
Mm.
So she didn't get to be there to get there. So
Sure.
for her half, what was her lowest point? What, really is the final push that causes her to, get the surgery done and commit completely to the surgery?
I was curious because you're right. What is so fascinating about the film is that Shirley is no longer there halfway through the movie. I was going to ask, and you kind of answered it for me, just that idea of how the two of them collaborated on the character to keep some of those consistencies in those mannerisms.
Yeah.
There's just such an interesting aspect of it too, of handing the baton off for,
Yes.
from a Chinese woman to an American woman, as far as
Yes.
especially how passing goes and everything. What was it like in conversations, maybe perhaps with McKenna? Was there any hesitation on her end? I listened to some of the interviews that the cast has given, and
Mhm.
when you're approaching a film like this, that's going to be some hot button topics, that's going to
Yes.
make people feel uncomfortable, that might make you feel uncomfortable. Was there hesitation on her end, and how did you all kind of come together? I don't want to say to quell any of that, but
Yeah.
to get on that same page of the story that we're telling is important. It's
Yes.
easy to say, yes, you're taking over for this Asian actress, and now this
Yeah.
white woman is the focus, but it still carries so much of the emotional depth of what Joan has felt, her experiences with her family.
Yes. Yes. Totally. Yes. There was a lot of, fear, I think, especially when we first started going out to actresses. But surprisingly, I think there might have been only one agent. Can't remember at which agency, like CAA or WME, who was actually like, I don't really support this. I don't want it in my clients.
Hmm.
Meeting you on this, but everybody else really got it, including McKenna's agent, CAA, and Maitri's agent. They were the people who really pushed it to them and was like, you got to read this, you got to support this. This is a great story, great script. And with McKenna, I mean, I had lunch with her to, talk about the role with her, and she really, even though she was very, very, honest and like, I have no idea what it's like to be an Asian American
Sure.
woman, but
Hmm.
she had so much to say about her growing up as a teenager. I mean, McKenna, who is this beautiful young lady, also received shitty things that were said about her looks and her weight and all of these other things. And that's how she really related to this, because, like you said earlier, right? It's really about the social media and about how society these days really want teenage girls to look perfect. And what does that look like? She really, really connected to that message. And she was also looking, I think, to do something that challenged her a little bit, because she just did the Ghostbusters movie
Hmm.
and she wanted to be seen as an adult, because she was 18 when she was shooting a movie. So I think she was looking for something like that. And then with Maitri, she was definitely a little bit afraid at the beginning. I remember when I spoke with her, she, I just said, uh, in art, in cinema in particular, I think we have to take risks, and what we're doing, I think, is meaningful, and it might piss some people off, or you know, uh, be controversial for some, but uh, that's also good. I know controversy is good in a
It
lot of
is.
ways,
It is.
and she quickly agreed, and we had a great chat as well about how she felt, as a Canadian Indian woman um, in Hollywood, and then Amelie, who plays Olivia, who's brilliant. she got it straight away. So she was, I mean, we got thousands of auditions for that role. And I remembered she came back for a callback. Afterwards, she wrote me this really, really poignant message about how important this film was and how much she wanted to be a part of the messaging. And that really cemented her her role in the movie.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love hearing you give the cast praise. It was cool watching an interview of the
Yeah.
cast giving you praise though for
Oh,
creating
yeah.
such a great space, for creating a great environment for him, for telling a story that is timely, that is confrontational in a lot of ways, that can be
Yeah.
controversial. But it is something
Totally.
that needs to be discussed and talked about. And
Yes.
something that also stood out to me in the interview, I believe Fong Du, who plays Joe's
Yes.
father, he was speaking about the fact that in a lot of film and a lot of especially American media, the Asian father is either not present, he's always working, there's this disconnect in love and things that he might
Hmm.
show. And I just thought it was so special watching the relationship that he was cultivating with Joan in the film. And I'd love to know
Yeah.
how much of her parents perhaps came from your own life and maybe how much of that was influenced from other stories or perhaps
Yeah.
the some of it too, when you are here making a film with an Asian cast directed by an Asian woman, are there stories
Yes.
and narratives that you want to show that you haven't seen?
Yes. Yes. Oh, great. Yeah, great questions. I've answers for all of the pieces. I'll start with one. I'm really thankful for how I think AAPI cinema has really progressed in the last even 8 to 10 years. You know, obviously with Crazy Rich Asians, with The Farewell,
Hmm.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. There have been so many great stories that really celebrate being Asian or being Chinese American. One experience that I always wanted to see, which I really tried to explore with Slanted, was this idea of shame. And yes, eventually I want everybody who is a person of color, whether you're Black or Asian or Hispanic or, whatever you are, to celebrate who you are.
Hmm.
But I think everybody, including yourself, I'm sure, maybe not to do with race, but other things, have felt shame and wanted to shed that part of yourself. And nobody likes to say, I was ashamed of being Black or I was ashamed of being Asian, but that's the truth, especially when you are a teenager and all you want to do is fit in. So I wanted to do a story about that. And then in relation to my parents, it is quite similar, I'd say, I mean, I'm an only child. My father was also a cleaner when he first immigrated to Australia. My parents are both very supportive, very generous and kind-hearted. And my relationship with my dad is definitely very similar to how it is in the movie. It was a very conscious choice to want to write to parents who were not tiger mums or tiger dads, generic stereotypical Chinese dad who, yeah, drinks himself to death or has no interest in their kids' lives and is emotionally unavailable. And that was actually the hardest thing when it came to casting, because I remembered when we sent out, I think it was two scenes for, actors to read for me to watch with auditions. Basically 90, I'd say 98% of the performances I got back were leaning towards the I'm emotionally unavailable, even during scenes where the dad is obviously like a
It's like
really,
it's on the
yeah,
page, like
loving, exactly, loving dad. And I remember thinking, like, man, do these actors think this is what the director wants, or are they all just like not
has,
loving to their own
has this
kids?
been a condition of how what you've seen in the
Yeah,
media and maybe the roles that have been available have
totally,
affected them too?
totally. Yes, yes. So but Fung was by far the best, and I was so happy that we found him because honestly, I don't think there would have been anybody else who would have fit that role. The only thing I was afraid of was would he look too young opposite Vivian? who, I mean, Vivian's just so, I mean, young looking. I mean, she's,
They're all young.
yes, yes. So I was very happy when we got into rehearsing and they met that they looked so great together.
He's just got this magnetic personality to him. That's it's
Yes.
an infectious smile. And
Yes, yes.
and I think that lends a hand into I think some of internal like what Joan internalizes too of I'm
Yeah.
pushing this person away who is trying so
Yes.
hard and who is so nurturing and gentle-hearted as well.
Totally.
And
Totally.
something that I loved is you start to scratch the surface of science fiction in the film with this idea of the transracial surgery,
Yeah.
and something for me that I've always felt about science fiction, getting away from the Star Wars and some of those that might be more of the action fantasy. I
Hmm.
think the best science fiction often reveals a lot about ourselves. It reveals a
Yes.
lot about humanity. You don't have to be in space to experience something that shifts inside you that's supernatural, whatever it
Hmm.
might be. Was there something as far as exploring that genre that you felt like gave a little more space for some of these complex emotions?
Yeah, that's really interesting because you're right. I think it doesn't matter how far-fetched the science fiction seems. I always think, and I agree. I think the best science fiction is when it, does reflect on the world and the culture that we live in. Eternal Sunshine is one of my favorite films and definitely influenced this. That's a very far-fetched, concept, but also
Sure.
in many ways, part of me wishes it was real. I don't know,
It's
like
it's
to,
so
yeah.
deeply human and moving.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think, I mean, what's fucked up is I think if Ethnos Inc. really existed in our world, that I truly think a lot of people would go
Sure.
and get it done. And so that's exciting to me in that where, I mean, it's not exciting because it's kind of fucked up that that it would take off, but it was important for me to create a layer of within the science fiction that felt almost too real, that it was adjacent to our reality. And that's kind of how I wanted to paint the world as well. As like, yes, this is the America we know, but it's just slightly off.
Hmm.
It feels more realistic and that it could actually happen.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think you're right though. And unfortunately, especially because again, this film just tackles this obsession with social media, this constant need to be online, to be seen by others, to
Yeah.
present a certain way. And if you don't, what is your value?
Yeah.
What are you doing? What is worth that you're bringing to the table there? And I think again, just that the science fiction aspect of it, this film gets so much more emotional and heartbreaking and confusing than a lot of
Mm.
typical dramas would because
Yeah.
it's touching on something that like you said it's hard to speak about shame, it's hard to
Yeah.
admit to some of these things that I think everybody kind of wrestles with, whether it's religious oppression, whether it's feeling racial injustice. There's so many things that people carry with them, and you
Yes.
just want to be somebody else. It's like you said, how can I shed this and
Yeah.
be what either people want me to be or what would be easiest to move through life unbothered here. And I just think
Absolutely.
the film is just such a triumph in so many ways. It is funny, it is poignant, it asks really deep and complex questions that I'm just so the few people who I've talked to already who have seen it, I think we've all shared very similar responses. This is
Yeah.
easily one of our favorite things coming out of the festival here.
Oh man.
I just to laugh, to cry, to feel heartbreak in a genre like this is just so impressive for a first feature
Thank
film
you.
too. I just love the swings that you're taking because every filmmaker is going to tell their story. Some people play it safer than others. There's nothing safe about this
Yeah.
story and the approach that you took, and I just love how well you pulled it off. And I think it does speak to the collaborative effort from you and the cast to tell something that can be so affecting and confusing in so many ways as to how you tap in with it emotionally. I've
Thank
got
you.
I've got time for just one last question here, but I was
Yeah.
just curious moving forward. what other types of stories, maybe, or types of genres are you looking forward to experiencing as a filmmaker and telling some of those
Yeah,
films?
yeah. For me, I think genre does not matter as much because it's all about the themes and the ideas that I want to play with. And that could be in comedy, could be in horror, could be in drama, thrillers, whatever it is. I'd have written my next movie that I want to make.
Awesome.
And
I'd
it's
love to hear that.
yeah, and it's really it's set in the world of competitive piano playing, but it's really tapping into this idea of basically the main character, she comes from poverty and she, worked 3 jobs. She worked her ass off to get to this competition, which is it's a real competition. They call it the Olympics of Piano. Happens every 4 years in Poland. She, does really, really well at the beginning, and then this other girl comes in who comes from music royalty and is a nepo baby. And it really taps into this idea of who deserves to win in a world where, we're told if you work hard, if you come from nothing, you can achieve anything.
Hmm.
Is that really the truth? How does injustice feed into envy?
Hmm.
And it becomes this kind of two-hander between these two girls, and you don't really know what the other girl objective is, if she's
Sure.
trying to fuck with our main character or not. And it gets very psychologically fucked up and crazy.
Awesome.
So
I'm on board.
yeah,
The tickets
excellent.
purchased. I'm sat. I'm seated. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, yes. I love Seven and Fight Club obviously being films that really tap into people's sins almost, and
Sure.
whether it's greed or wrath or lust or whatever it is, I feel like those things that people like to hide within themselves, I like to explore in a movie.
Absolutely. You're poking
So yeah.
holes. You're poking. I
Yes,
love it. I love it that
exactly.
you speak my
Exactly.
film language, and so
It's so
thank you.
great.
Thank you so much, Amy, for
Of
being here.
course.
Slanted. I cannot wait to talk about this movie more, to share it.
Yes.
It was just so incredible. Thank you so
Oh
much
man.
again.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it, Nick.
Absolutely. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. All right. Bye.